Hello and welcome to Reaching for the Moon, presented by Everglades Moon Local Council, Florida chapter of Covenant of the Goddess. COG supports individual works by its covens, members, and local councils. It's a vibrant network of a myriad of Wiccan and witchy resources, religious support, friendships, service opportunities, and more. To find out more, visit our website, emlc.net, our Facebook page, facebook.com/EvergladesMoon, or Twitter, @EMLCTweets.
Hello everyone, this is Lady Bridget, and welcome to episode 34 for Lugnasaadh 2017, or Lammas, however you want to pronounce it. We're not snobs here, we don't care, pronounce it any way you like. It being summer, and especially very, very hot here in South Florida, a lot of our members have made alternate plans for the summer, and so we're not going to have our usual podcast segments that you're used to. But no worries, the show will go on, and I have a podcast for you. In fact, it's a pretty special one. A couple of months ago, Everglades Moon was proud to be able to present in the theater in Miami a re-showing of the original The Wicker Man, which is a cult favorite, and I do use the word cult in the sense of movie cult rather than in the sense of religious cult. But it is a classic, it is a favorite, and we had a panel discussion prior to showing the movie in which a lot of the movie's themes and topics were discussed, and it was extremely interesting, I found. So I thought that would be great for me to bring to you, because The Wicker Man is one of those movies that's associated with several different Sabbats, from Beltane to Lugnasaadh. So here we go. We're going to listen to that. Before we hear that, though, however, we have a special song called Llew from the group SilverBranch, which was made up of a coven that used to be members of Everglades Moon Local Council, and sadly, they are no longer together. But they did have an album called Hand to Hand, which unfortunately is no longer available. But I really do still want to bring you their music, and I was able to get in touch with their former high priestess, who graciously allowed us to play some of their songs. So we'll bring you that, and then we'll have the panel discussion right after Llew. So without further ado, I will start the program. Enjoy!
Shining high, Llew, 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 fiery one, a blazing sun, Llew, 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 high in the sky, shining high, Llew, 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 fiery one, a blazing sun, Llew, 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 high in the sky, shining high, Llew, 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 fiery one, a blazing sun, Llew, 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 high in the sky, shining high, Llew, 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 the blazing sun, fiery one, the blazing sun, high in the sky, shining high, high in the sky, shining high, fiery one, the blazing sun, fiery one, the blazing sun, high in the sky, shining high, high in the sky, shining high, fiery one, the blazing sun, fiery one, the blazing sun, high in the sky, shining high, high in the sky, shining high, fiery one, the blazing sun, fiery one, the blazing sun, high in the sky, shining high, high in the sky, shining high, fiery one, the blazing sun, fiery one, the blazing sun, high in the sky, shining high, high in the sky, shining high, high in the sky, shining high, Llew, 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 It was upon a Lammas night when corn rigs are bonny. Beneath the moon's unclouded light I held a while to Annie. The time went by with careless heed till 'tween the late and early. With small persuasion she agreed to see me through the barley.
All right, I guess we'll get started, if that's all right. My name is Manny. I'm the Public Information Officer for Everglades Moon Local Council. And we have a couple of people here who are also from Everglades Moon Local Council and will identify themselves. We're going to do a panel session on the Wicker Man beforehand to go over ways to view this film, because it's not really a pagan positive film, but it does have a tremendous amount of imagery in it. So let me introduce the guests in a moment. I'd like to share a story about the Wicker Man, a personal story about the Wicker Man. So when I was growing up, I grew up in Central Florida, and we were a test market for HBO. Our particular street was a test market for HBO, so I was able to see all sorts of films very early on. In the mid-1970s, I was able to see Monty Python and the Holy Grail, for example. So I was able to get these unusual films, and I had heard about the Wicker Man. And another thing that we did is that during summers, we were able to get passes, and it would allow us to go into the local movie theater. We'd be able to spend the entire day there. And The Wicker Man was actually a film that my parents had forbidden me to see. They would not allow me to see The Wicker Man at all. And The Wicker Man wasn't showing in the U.S., so how they heard about The Wicker Man, I don't know. And I had heard that a few years later, The Wicker Man was showing at the Omni here, and they would not let me go. Now, to put that in context, they allowed me to watch The Exorcist and Jaws by myself. So there was something about this film that was just out of bounds. And I was able to see The Wicker Man finally in 1981 at the University of Miami as part of an art project. Today will be the first showing of The Wicker Man in Miami on a big screen in something like 37 years. So that's very exciting for us. Yay! Right. Let me introduce the panelists today. Heather Greene, who is in the machine here. Right. Heather, it doesn't quite fit on my phone, but let me introduce who Heather Greene is. Heather Greene is a film historian who has spent the past 4 years working on an in-depth study on the representation of witches and witchcraft in Hollywood cinema and television. She has a BA in film from Wesleyan University and an MA in film from Emory University. She is also a freelance journalist and the managing editor of The Wild Hunt, a news agency dedicated to pagans, heathens, and polytheists worldwide. Heather is a member of Covenant of the Goddess, Circle Sanctuary, and Religion News Writers Association. And so she's our expert today on yeah. And our other panelist today is introducing themselves.
Hi, I'm Canu. I'm a member of the Everglades Moon Local Council, which is helping host this first showing in what we hope to be a film series, so we hope to have you back again. I was the founding first officer of the local council called Everglades Moon Local Council, which is a part of Covenant of the Gods. That's a mostly national, sometimes a little bit international organization where helps represent witches and Wiccans. We've pursued a lot of interfaith efforts and religious freedom efforts over the years, so we wanted you at least to know a little bit about who we are. And I'm also a third degree initiate of something called the Georgian tradition. So I've been practicing Wicca for more than 31 years now. I'm a student of various types of pagan practices, so they're not really relevant to our film or our talk today, but basically the reason I'm on your panel is because I'm part of Everglades Moon Local Council still, and also because of my background in the craft.
Thank you. So we have a PowerPoint to kind of lay out a couple of things about the Wicker Man. If you've not seen this film before, it's a pagan-centric film, and if you could move ahead to a couple of things, because we've already talked about Everglades Moon Local Council, and let's talk about modern paganism and polytheism. It's a grouping of pre-Christian devotional faiths and practices that draw primarily on the traditional religions that are often Eurocentric, and it focuses on a reverence for nature, vitality, and spirituality of the natural world. And some groupings about them we've already gone over includes Wiccans, heathens, as well as witches and druids. To get some terminology together, Wicca is a religion, witchcraft is a spiritual practice, and witches are practitioners. So if we can get to the Wicker Man, because I think that's why everyone's here, I'm going to take the hat off. So about the Wicker Man, to put some context to this, the Wicker Man is a horror movie. It's not anything else. It's specifically a film that is out of the horror genre. And it particularly comes out of a subgenre called folk horror, which is rooted in presenting rural traditions that are often either Celtic or European paganism. Folk horror has also had influence in the United States. It's primarily a British subgenre, but it has there are folk horror films that are inside of the United States. I'll go over a couple of them in a minute. The Wicker Man is considered by Cinefantastique the Citizen Kane of horror movies. It has had extensive cultural impact from Stephen King to the Burning Man Festival. For those of you, has everyone seen the film before? Not everyone has seen the film. So it does involve some burning. Just not revealing anything, but it does involve some burning. So the Burning Man, the first Burning Man looked like the Wicker Man, and modern films like The Witch are also part of the folk horror subgenre. And so we see the elements how the Wicker Man has influenced some of these films today. Stephen King's Children of the Corn is an American folk horror film, and very much in the tradition of the Wicker Man. It combines the elements of musicals and comedies. For those of you, again, who've not seen it, there's going to be a lot of pagan-esque music in the film. So it will be replete in sort of pagan imagery and pagan language. So in that sense, it has tremendous pagan overtones. And so that's why very often people who practice paganism are exposed to the Wicker Man. There will be great disagreement on the question of whether it's a must-see film. I happen to come from the side that it's a must-see film. Others don't think that it's a must-see film. The film, there are a couple of other pieces that are there. The film starts off as a cliche of an unwelcome visitor coming into town. And that unwelcome visitor is from the 1950s Western tradition. Someone comes into town who you don't want, and that person starts snooping. And that's essentially what the film unfolds as. And the film also contrasts tremendously Calvinism against fertility, feminism, and sexuality. Heather, anything you want to jump in just?
Not yet. You
Okay.
keep going
Okay.
right now.
Go ahead. Some suggestions on viewing The Wicker Man. You'll want to be on the lookout for a tremendous amount of pagan imagery. The images echo, like I said, elements of paganisms, but will also describe it as alien as well as dangerous. For those of you who have seen films like The Blair Witch Project, that also comes from the tradition of The Wicker Man. The very, very first scene in the I'm not giving anything away, just so you know. Okay? The very, very first scene will be a statement of gratitude, telling the people, telling you, the viewer, that the film producers are grateful to the individuals of Summer Isle for having allowed them to film their religious traditions, right? And so that is very much like the Blair Witch Project. It is, of course, not true. So what it does is it sets up this element of reality that isn't there at all, right? And so in the acknowledgments, we pick up an idea that this is telling us a representation of something that's real. It turns out that it's not real. Everything here is fake. Right? The theme of transgression is dangerous. It's throughout the film. You're going to see it over and over, particularly from the Calvinist side. The police officer in the film is very devout, and he's going to keep framing the problem here, or the problem that's being viewed, by the problem that he sees inside of Summer Isle is that they've turned away from Christianity, and everything then unfolds because they've turned away from Christianity. And the theme of evil lurking in the ordinary is exactly what's going on. It is that evil is sort of present in kind of the day-to-day life of these individuals. Because they've turned away from Christianity, they've allowed evil really to corrupt every aspect of life, from education to economics on the island. No, we weren't there yet.
You looked over.
Right. And so the film has a couple of things that you'll want to be on the lookout for, that the women enter as powerful figures, so there's feminine strength is shown. Fertility and sexuality throughout the film are destigmatized, so sexuality is very much up front and presented in a very, very different way than Calvinistic Christianity. And Calvinism is the counterbalance inside of the film, that we see this form of Christianity that's very, very conservative as the lens that's constantly telling us that there's a problem in the film, or that there's a problem in this community. And so some of the images that you're going to see in terms of portrayals of feminine strength, there will be women surrounding a fire, and they're going to be jumping over the fire. Again, I'm not giving anything away by looking at these images. If you can move ahead, because we can go through the images, that a woman is selected to kind of be the figure of the harvest, that she's the May Queen. Just move ahead so that we can see these. And that three women are sort of like the powerful characters against Lord Summerisle. Lord Summerisle is played by Christopher Lee in the film, and there's a read on this that's also problematic, that you have an aristocrat kind of using paganism for to create not just elements of control, but also to present these people as sort of servile and somewhat stupid. That they're following a religion that allows them to be controlled more easily. And then the destigmatization of fertility and sexuality. I believe, I had to check, and then I kept going. I couldn't find a definite confirmation of this. This is the first time in film that a woman was shown breastfeeding, and so that in itself was transgressive. The maypole as an image of sexuality is shown and actually discussed quite a bit in the film, but the maypole is specifically sexual. Let's move ahead. And then finally, as a Calvinist contrast, that Britt Eklund will have a scene where it turns out that it's not her who's naked, but that she does a seduction of the main character in the film, and she will be naked in this seduction. The lead character then gives us a cross, and he reminds us that Calvinism is really the only way. And then we see the imagery of the occult practices that overlays everything. So if we can just run through those images fairly quickly, we're going to see the hand of glory. We're going to see images of candies and cakes. We're going to see a star essentially formed out of swords. So we're going to see occult imagery over and over throughout the film. And what it does is it adds all of these layers in the film that make it clearly a pagan-centric film. It's going to have stuff that if you've ever opened a book in paganism, that as you look at this film, you're going to say, oh, that's from this, that's from that, that's from that. And so it's fairly clear that the film is portraying paganism, but then ultimately it's going to portray paganism in a very negative way. And so there are a few takeaways. First of all, it's not a pagan positive film. Don't expect that from this. It's going to present the pagans as sort of inside of a feudal system, easily seduced and easily subverted. The film is, however, an excellent discussion of paganism. I use it in my classes when we talk about spirituality, so I have them watch The Wicker Man, because it allows for a conversation to happen. It presents paganism as transgressive, dangerous, and disruptive. And then your number one takeaway from the film is that we do not burn people. So that goes through the PowerPoint.
That may be more of a takeaway from the panel than the film.
Yeah.
That's okay. Heather, do you want to jump in right now?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to go back to some of the points that were brought up. if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think I would like to start by saying I think the interest in the pagan part that draws pagans into it and people who are interested in folk practices into the film is the first layer of the film. And I think it draws you in because of this promise of a return to nature, or a return to these older practices, the freedom of sexuality, the freedom of all these wonderful things that Christopher, Lord Summerisle's character promises to the people. So it draws us in and makes us one of the islanders, which is why at the end it's extremely creepy and unsettling, and why it's a horror film, because we become party to the murder that happens at the end, and we're enjoying it, but yet we're watching this horrible thing, and that's the way horror works. So yeah, it works on that level and then makes us very uncomfortable, but I think that there are some points that are layered deeper in the film that are very problematic. I don't believe this is about there's any female strength in this movie. I think, what was the word you used? I have to go back to that PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
That first section you said, portrayals of female strength, feminine strength. I disagree. I don't think at all. I think this is two patriarchies fighting it out. And I think it objectifies women, and it objectifies female body. There are three main women in the film. They're all blonde. At different points in the film, they're naked. You never see men running around naked. You don't see male sexuality whatsoever. The goddess is portrayed by Lord Summerisle, not by a woman. And she's followed along by the three blonde women, or he's followed along by the three blonde women. So I find that what you have here is the patriarchy on one hand, from who's represented by the police, who's represented by the tradition, who's represented by society, mainstream society is what he represents, law, English law. And he then comes into this island, which is supposed to be this pagan, dual-centered religion, but what we find out is really Lord Summerisle's grandfather decided he wanted to make these cool crops on this island, convinced the people of gave them their old religion and their old god, and he pretty much rules over. So you're looking at traditional mainstream culture, society, politics versus really a despot. Really, he's an autocrat. He's ruling over them. He makes all the rules. They do nothing without him. So you're looking at two types of government. And so if you go down to that level and you look at it at that level, then you have to bring in the context of the time that this movie was made. During the late 60s, early 70s, when there was a lot of upheaval here and in England, questioning what types of politics do we want, questioning what types of culture do we want. So you're looking at a fight between two types of cultures. And the movie seems to conclude that the counterculture is dangerous. Sort of the counterculture, or the warning about cults. And I think that the pagan layer draws us in, but I think underneath that it's a warning. The film is a warning. So that is my reading of it, and that's an overview. And now I just silenced everybody.
Can you say more about like what the warning is? So the warning is that we could get caught up in this, and we would return to this kind of behavior again.
I think the film's warning is not so much the warning isn't against. You have to strip off the folk culture. You have to take away and strip away all of the English folk culture, because that stuff is loved. That was used. That's a tool. That's pretty much a plot device, if you will, to make this work. It colors the film, but what you're looking at is it's a cult. I think it's a warning against cult behavior. I think it's a warning against a theocratic society, a despot, against oh gosh, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, against a non-democratic government, and possibly, the religion is complicated, because I think the religion on the other side, the Christianity expressed, the Calvinism, is also quite frightening. The level it gets to. So I think there is a warning against extremism in this film present underneath. And I think the pagan layers are bring us in and entice us, but they aren't what the film's about, really, if you dig deep enough. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think in part two, Heather, you're getting at some very good themes that we can draw out of this movie. It doesn't end up showing women in leadership roles in particular. It does show women enacting fundamental parts of what they considered the society's expression of religion on the island, which is where Manny's drawn some of those imageries from. And but I think that the plot device of using pagan practices as a counterpoint to the police officer you'll see in the movie sets up both the theme of it as a horror movie, right? The things that might seem like they should be safe, associated with the natural world, things that we could relate to, things that in and of themselves wouldn't be threatening normally, are used to show us basically this police officer getting drawn into that community and led through a very particular path. The practices that we see in the movie are basically familiar enough to pagans that they resonate with some of the things, right? The fruitfulness of crops, the recognition of the turn of the seasons, the fact that things are not just portrayed as practical stuff like here's an apple, but portrayed symbolically in our own lives and how we turn the seasons and how we both learn from them and help portray the things about our connection to the earth. And the tension that they set up with the police officer, whose Christianity is literally as upfront in most of his interactions with the island people as is his role as a policeman, are a very sharp counterpoint to how the people are living. And I think while the fundamental plot in this asks us to identify with the police officer, we are almost always seeing how things play out fundamentally from his perspective. But as a horror film, you see just enough beyond what he can see so that you feel the tension of what's going on in his interactions. We're not captured within the policeman's perspective, but we're also asked to identify with him in many ways as the plot moves forward, as he is potentially surprised by what he sees or potentially shocked by what he sees. And for the era in which this film was first released, the tension of kind of what type of culture and society are we going to have either in the United States or in England or in a couple different parts of Western society was definitely right up front. So it was asking people to evaluate some of the things that we think we know about each of those cultures, right? About kind of law and Christianity and the forces that try and help us be an ordered society versus things that may push against that, whether they're rebellious, transgressive, natural, less associated with a kind of law and order perspective. It's an interesting film to me in particular because I'm an environmental lawyer and I actually work for the public. So at one point when I was young, my kids came back home and they had gone to the store with my wife and brought me back a little patch that they wanted to give me. They were very happy to give me. It said Earth Police on it and it looked like a little badge. And, at one point when I was talking to them years later too about what I was doing for work, there was a back and forth about how I kind of realized I had to admit I am the man, right, that might come after people to enforce the law. And as noble as I think those goals are about helping protect the environment, helping people clean up their messes, I have a role that fundamentally puts me kind of on both sides of the tension that we see in this film, where I am part of the government, and maybe I want to consider myself part of the best of what it can be, but I'm also a pagan, and I've been so for years. So I end up watching a film like this and seeing myself on both sides of that tension, and you'll probably experience, because of the perspective of the film, focusing on our police officer as kind of one of the very main characters, and doing a lot from his perspective about what he sees as he's trying to figure out a mystery on the island, kind of what it means to experience some of these representations about paganism for almost the first time, because you see his reactions to them very up front. And while he has an affront about them himself, a lot of viewers of The Wicker Man don't see much of what is portrayed as an affront to them. That also sets up some of the horror of how the film plays out. But I'll try and let you experience that as best you can for the people who haven't seen it before. Heather, do you have some more you want to add to our discussion about it?
I thought if you're interested in historical perspective in this film and how it works with other films that were being released at the time. Now, England was very different than the U.S., so my studies were in the U.S., but during the early 70s in the U.S., and to some degree coming from England, this film was released in 1975 in the U.S., and it was released during a period of time that the United States industry had just been released from its censorship. So there were tons of horror films, and this was also a time when paganism, witchcraft specifically, was becoming more and more open to the public, more accessible, and filmmakers had more access to the practices. This was also a period of time when the Church of Satan was very active. So Hollywood producers, who were very much in line with British filmmakers as well, they worked pretty closely at this. We're getting to work very closely together. We're becoming very aware of a lot of this stuff, a lot of the practices being real. So you see a rash of films in the early 70s, horror films specifically, that are very much like The Wicker Man, where they use occult practices of some sort. And usually a young man who has not been married, walks in on a town of some sort that's practicing. Necromancy is a good one as an example. And lots of couple, actually, I think, that walks in on that. But either a man or a couple walk in a town that's a weird town. In American films, it's not an island. It's a town, a small town. And they find out that people around them slowly over the film are practicing usually Satanism of some sort in the U.S. In this case, it's a folk religion. And by the end, they're wrapped up in it. Someone's been killed. Whatever the ending is, and this film plays into that entire genre, into this genre of using the occult as a way of propelling the horror and making us frightened of what lurks in society. A lot of this is just pure sensationalism in the U.S. anyway, because we weren't allowed to see these type of films prior because of censorship. So it was just a huge amount of a release. And that's what the whole early 70s was about here and in England, just this release. And that's why paganism came out at that same time outside of film. So it plays into all of that.
Do you recall off the top when decriminalization happened for witchcraft? When was the decriminalization of witchcraft in the UK?
When it was 1957.
1957, yeah, good. So you have the same date that I did, so that's good. Yeah, it's like,
I think 1957.
Yeah, 57.
But it wasn't in the U.S. Of course, it was 1970, I believe, the first, we started to see public books printed here. And so most filmmakers in the U.S. you don't start seeing occult in film until 1970s. England was a little different.
And then we see in the 80s the rise of satanic panic.
Right, that's a whole different ballgame right there. That changes everything.
And to also set this in context, between the movie and the community that I participate in, at least, these are both things that seem to call back to practices that we like to think of as ancient and vital and important for us to recall something about our connection with the earth. The Covenant of the Goddess was first formed in 1976, I believe, 75 at Samhain, 75. And so at the same time that this film was being released, there were people who were looking to form formal associations to try and help us basically network, protect each other, and to advocate for some of the things that you may see in this film, but not necessarily the point of this film, right? The things that this film calls as a horror film are the question of, but for the law or but for Christianity, would we do horrible things, maybe in the name of something that itself isn't horrible, and so we could get drawn in, right? So the warning that Heather has talked about has been considered in many people's minds as a very real warning that the pagan practices in and of themselves must or may have some underlying kind of horror going on, right? If only we could see far enough into it. I'll tell you, 30 plus years, if there's an underlying horror, I haven't found it. You know, we like to raise children as anybody would, to have friends and loved ones as anybody would. And if there's a big difference about where we seek wisdom, it's in our own ability to relate to nature, to see what it has to tell us about how to live well. Because when we distance ourselves from that, we end up with more and more problems of being an isolated species, whether that's artificially because we can't really isolate ourselves, or in the ways that we even think about and approach each other and the rest of nature. Right? That type of isolation is really a huge illusion. So the tension that the film calls is basically one, in part, one of, are we really isolated from all this or not? And you'll see the policeman as a lone representative of Christianity in this movie, you know, kind of also representing that isolation from the rest of nature or from society in some ways, even as a representative of some really fundamental things about society and culture of the time.
Manny, I think the point you brought up about the 80s satanic films versus this points, I think, very well to why this film has a deeper sense of paganism than those films. Because during this early 70s, the experience in these films was not about demonizing the practice. It was about sensationalizing it, making it titillating. Whereas in the 80s, when you have the Satanic Panic, it's strictly a demonization. It's hardcore evil versus good. Whereas this is titillating. It's exploitation in every way. That's why there were a lot more naked women in these horror films in the early 70s than there are in the 80s films. It's different. There is, and if you watch early 70s horror films, occult, and I can give you a list of some of them to watch, very, very similar in the way it's structured. And so I think that's why this is titillating, exciting. It really brings you into the occult experience. And in this case, it's the British folklore version versus the satanic stuff that was seen in the 70s American films. So I think that's why it's so rich in folklore, which makes it, draws us in, really.
I was going to ask if you have any questions, but I also wanted to raise another point. This is actually a film that's a series of rituals, isn't it? Right. So because the exposure of the policeman is itself an elaborate ritual, and so we're kind of seeing a film that has layers and layers of ritual rather than just a simple arc.
It does throughout it. There are scenes specifically with the music and the way the music goes.
Right.
Some of them are very creepy.
Yeah.
Yep. I think what you'll see as the film develops, though, is part of what Manny's mentioning, that there, and one of the things that some pagans like about the film, I believe, is the sense of that there is a deep ritual going on kind of throughout the film. You can judge that for yourself when we finish seeing it, of course. But do you have questions or comments that you'd like to share from either our discussion or your own experience of the film before?
No, well, would you able to ask questions after the film?
Heather might not be able to join us, but Manny and I can certainly be here.
What?
We were asked whether or not people could ask questions after the film, Heather. So yeah. I don't know that you'd be able to join us, but I know Manny and I can be here.
Yeah, I can't. I'm going to be somewhere else, but if I have my phone, so if there's a pressing question, you can always text me.
Well, we really appreciate you being here, Heather, and sharing your background in film and your experience of this film in particular. But anything else before we try and get started? Yes?
Yeah, I think it's a two-part question. First part, so my understanding is that this was not made as a warning to non-pagans against paganism. It was more like exploiting the theme of paganism, of the occult, in order to make, to draw the public in and make money out of this movie.
Yeah. Did you hear the question?
I didn't hear the question, I'm sorry.
So he asked that this film was not made I'm going to change the language around. You help me around. This film was not made as kind of anti-propaganda against paganism.
Is that a question?
Yes. Yes.
I don't think it was made to be propaganda against paganism. I think it was made to be an exploitative horror film that puts paganism, and not paganism, it's not even paganism, puts British folkloric practices just as the environment that is creepy and not against what we know. Different. So it's pitting something different, it's sensationalizing it, exploiting it, and that way it's othering it, making it creepy. And I think that the cyclical practices Manny was talking about, there being rituals, are part of that too. That's different. It's creepy. It's putting us in an uncomfortable place. So I don't think this is propaganda against paganism at all. I don't think that this film is really about paganism. I think it's about something else.
Yeah, and this is a horror film, right? So please approach it as a horror film. That those elements are there. Again, as part of the things that I said in the introduction, part of the things that I find interesting is the way that the setup occurs, as though it's presenting something that is real, very much like the Blair Witch Project. So it's saying, like, this is something that's real, and so it draws you in, and then adds the pagan imagery to continuously draw you in. So in that exploitive way, that's how the film accomplishes that, creating the milieu around itself. Yeah.
Yep. It actually uses the thing that we all like to do at films, of suspending some of our disbelief, and adds more elements to that.
Yeah.
And also involves us then in the experience of what the plot is as a ritual, and also what the plot ends up being as a horror film. And I think, like Heather and Manny have adequately said, it's really taking advantage of some of both the cultural processes that were bringing paganism more to the forefront, and Satanism more to the forefront over a couple of decades around when this film was made and released, and also just the cultural freedom that a lot of people were seeking at the time to basically have more self-expression and less of a heavy hand of society and law. And it does a good job of, I said taking advantage of it, exploiting it is probably an even more accurate term.
I really recommend, if you're interested in seeing a similar movie, it's the only one that's coming to my mind, but I've got a list, and I can send that to you, Manny, of some other ones. But there's a movie called Necromancy that was made. It's with Orson Welles, and it's a couple that goes into the town, but it's built very much the same way, where they go into this small town and everything looks normal. He gets a job, and then they realize things are not quite what they seem, and by the end, there's death and murder, and it plays the same way, although it's an American setting in a small town, etc. That it's not an anti-witchcraft Satan film. It's horror. It's playing with us, as you say.
So is the Dark Secret of Harvest Home, right? Say
that again.
The Secret of Harvest Home. Is that our Harvest House? The one with Betty Davis in 1979 miniseries that turned into a film. It has the same element that people go to a small town, and as they get to know what's going on, you get all of these elements coming out. Well, Heather, thank you very much for joining us. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I love it. Anytime.
Thanks for being
Enjoy
our
the film.
Thank you.
Thanks for being our special guest star.
Yeah.
Hey there, this is Lady Bridget, and I wanted to share with you a little bit about how, as Wiccans, we're always trying to incorporate our belief system into our everyday normal lives. And one thing that in Everglades Moon Local Council we've done, it's a very simple thing, But in speaking with other people, I find that other people probably haven't thought of it, or they think it's too much work, or that people wouldn't do it. So I decided I would share it with you all here on the podcast. And it's one of the ways in which we walk the talk. And this particular little item I call our Feastware kit. So a Feastware kit is just a little something in which you carry plates, cups, utensils. It can be very, very simple, and you bring it with you when you go to Sabbath or to Esbit or even to local council meetings or any other meetings where you're going to have a potluck. We have a lot of meetings and events where we have potluck. People bring different dishes to share, and the host usually is the person expected to provide paper plates and paper cups and plastic utensils. And what happens is there's an awful lot of garbage that gets generated. This is not in keeping with our ecological principles, and it is not in keeping with making a smaller carbon footprint, not in keeping with making less garbage, not in keeping with honoring the planet. I mean, as far as my belief system goes, those are paramount, and using paper products and using disposable things does not create less trash, does not honor the mother. So, in Everglades Moon, a few years back, for Turning the Tides, which is our annual event that we do, a 3-day event in the beginning of December, we serve breakfast and we have a potluck feast prior to ritual on Saturday night. It was our custom to provide paper plates and plasticware, paper cups and so forth, for the participants, but 60 to 80 people using paper plates for 3 to 4 meals generates a lot of garbage. And we easily could see that this was an area that we could improve. And so we came up with the idea of asking people to bring a Feastware kit, asking people to bring a washable plate, cup, and utensils for each member of their party. Now, if you're camping and you're preparing meals, you automatically would bring something to eat off of. Unfortunately, when people are camping, oftentimes they turn to paper products and disposable. And again, we're trying to create less garbage. So what we've asked people to do is to bring their own little kit, bring your own little plate and cup, a bowl if you think you're going to have cereal or soup, a little utensil, and it can be so simple. And if people forget, one of our members graciously put together a little kit that fits right in a large Ziploc bag, and it's just a plate and a bowl and a cup and knife, fork, and spoon. That's it. Very simple. You can put your name on the Ziploc bag, and there you go. And it's $5. Something as simple as that, and yet it made a huge difference in the amount of garbage that we didn't generate when we did our event. And we even took it one step further. In order to do the same thing at meetings, we ask people to bring their own dishes to the meetings. And you just set up a little wash station, and people wash them before they leave, and you pop them back in their little container, and they're ready for the next time. Our first Feastware kit, Lord Riken and my first Feastware kit, was a picnic basket that he picked up at the thrift store. And of course, being the overachiever that I am, I put in a tablecloth and napkins and salt and pepper shaker and some hot sauce and some Mrs. Dash and a few other items. And over the years, I've pared it down. So now I use this little plastic bag that has a zipper top that probably Sheets or something like that came in. Those little zipper bags that when you buy a set of king or queen size sheets, they come in this really nice container. And I hate like heck throwing out anything that is just that well made. And it can be used for other things. I used to keep my kids' Fisher-Price toys in them and stuff like that. They're eminently usable to hold small items. And they're about the right size to hold a plate and a cup and a saucer. Now, like I said, our first Feastware kit was in a picnic basket. And being ex-SCA, my husband had wooden bowls and wooden plates. And so that's what we used because that's what we had. However, they were pretty heavy. And then we went to a set that was, plastic from the dollar store. And those were pretty easy, but they weren't very sturdy. They were a little on the flimsy side. And if you've ever spilled feast food all over your ritual robe, you'll know that flimsy's not what you want. So now we have a very lightweight set of aluminum, which is a dish and cup, bowl, utensils, and I still keep the salt and pepper shaker and the hot sauce in there because we know what we like. And this way we can season the food to our taste instead of trying to find salt in somebody's house that we've never been to, or if you're out in the woods having feast after a circle, maybe there isn't any. And then I have a little Tupperware container of it, and I have enough to share with other people. So that is my offering to you, to consider asking people to bring their own dinnerware and set up a little washing station, just a little place where they can wash the dish and then rinse it off and dry it. You just need a few hand towels. It's not a big deal. And when you explain to your pagan friends and your Wiccan friends that this is why you're doing it, I am pretty sure that they'll be on board with it. It's a small item. It's such a tiny thing. And yet, it is a big step. It is a step in the right direction. It is a step in the way of thinking, how can we reduce our garbage? How can we reduce the impact that we make on the earth? It's a very small step, like I said, and it may seem like an insignificant thing. But I'll tell you right now, adding it up, if you go to 8 Sabbats a year, if you go to 12 Esbats a year, that's 20 events at which you are using paper products that you don't need to use. 20 events. Multiply that by how many people are at those events, and that's a lot of trash. Just think about it that way. And I promise you, it will be worthwhile. Float the idea among your friends and see what you all think. It has worked well for us here at Everglades Moon, and I'm happy to share it with you. And it's a good way to walk your talk. Blessed be.
Hi, everyone. Before we begin our last segment of this episode, we'd like to thank you for listening. Putting a podcast together is a time-consuming labor of love, but knowing that someone is listening to our hard work and hopefully gaining something from it makes it worthwhile. Would you let us know you like the podcast by going to our website at emlc.net, click on the podcast tab, and write a comment. Tell us what you like and what you'd like to hear more of on our podcast. And even better, why not leave us a rating on iTunes? Ratings help us become more visible to more people. It's not about ego, it's all about service. Thank you, and blessed be.
For our last song, we have a wonderful piece called Summer of Fae by Mama Gina, and it's from her album, Goddess Kissed. You can learn more about Mama Gina and purchase her music at mamagina.com. That's MAMAGINA.com. We hope you will support all of the pagan artists that are featured on our podcast. Happy Lammas and blessed be.
"22 miles on a mountain road, and up and down and around we go. My brakes got hot and I had to slow in the middle of the day. The world grew misty and the air grew green. I doubted my direction neath this canopy of oak and ash and maple trees. Well, I thought I'd lost my way. Right about noon I broke down on a tricksy road so far from town, a rusty shack on uneven ground, and I called AAA. No one home but a dog that barked and a circle of stones in their front yard. Well, I drifted to sleep and I dropped my guard and my dreams began to stray. Hey, oh, winding my way. Hey, oh, into the middle of the day. A star awoke before my eyes, and another until the sky was wings and teeth and poison flies conspiring I should stay. Old wood carved by rain and snow, and quartz and crystal and dead things' bones. When I slept there betwixt the stones, and the fairies had their way. They plucked my eyes right from my head and boiled them in the sun. They stuffed my ears with dandelions and ripped away my tongue. He said that I was none of these, and deaf and blind and dumb. I was closer to the brilliant soul I was to become. Hey, winding my way. Hey, it was the summer of the fair. I died right there in the summer sun, and the soul I thought hard-earned and won. Well, the fairies, oh, they had their fun till I faded into light. There was nothing left to call my own, and they gave it all back, and how it shone. They said, remember this, and my eyes flew open, and the tow truck was in sight. 22 miles on a mountain road, and up and down and around we go. And I won't look back, 'cause I'm going home. Oh, but I'll remember this day. Winding my way. Hey, it was the summer of the fair. Hey, winding my way. Hey, oh, it was the summer of the fair. 22 miles on a mountain